4, 29 through 30. 1 Kings 4, 29 through 30. Now God gave Solomon wisdom and a very great discernment and broadness of the mind, like the sands of the beach or the seashore. Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the sons of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. That was 1 Kings 4, 29 and 30.
Good to see everybody. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where a friend recommends a movie and they just rave about it and just go way over the top, and then you go see it and you're kind of and then they ask you about it and you say, well, I like the part where it said the end. That was a pretty good part. And you kind of have to be nice about it. And I've learned from the other side to not over-recommend stuff because then their expectations are too high. Or if you're, a restaurant, a friend might recommend a restaurant, and then you go, it's like not that good at all. And he's, well, the napkins are great, but other than that, it wasn't really my cup of tea at all. There's been plenty of times, I bet, where your expectations are pretty high. Either they play it up too much, or maybe you have your expectations, kind of out of control, and then it ends up the reality is kind of underwhelming for you. I wonder about that when the Queen of Sheba went to see Solomon. That's what we're going to be talking about. Rocky just read part of the record that we have as far as Solomon's wisdom, but I don't know if you're aware of this. This woman, the Queen of Sheba, she wanted to go meet Solomon because she'd heard about him. Because not only was he wise, he was also pretty rich, and he was famous. We're going to be looking at 1 Kings 10 here in just a minute. News about this, because there are plenty of kings. King was not a new concept, but this guy kind of stood out, and the news about him spread everywhere. There have been plenty of kings with power and gold and things like that. But what really stood out about this guy, he was very, very rich, but he was also very, very wise. As Rocky just read for us, his wisdom was kind of like the sands on the seashore, just unmeasurable. And he was supposed to be pretty amazing. So the Queen of Sheba packed up and decided to go see for herself. And it was a long trip, which we'll get to here in a second. And I can imagine that on the way there, she probably, this is total conjecture, she may have thought, wow, he's going to be far more than I expect, or maybe he's not going to be that great. Maybe it's all just good PR, and all kinds of things were probably running through her mind. We're going to find out a little bit what was going through her mind. Here's 1 Kings 10, verse 1. Now, when the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with difficult questions. So I don't know if she scribbled them down on the trip or if she had them memorized, but I find that pretty interesting that she came to test him with difficult questions. She was not just on a sightseeing tour. She was coming to get some answers. She might end up seeing some impressive rich people stuff, but she had that. Mainly, she was coming to talk to Solomon, and she had some questions. Here's verse 2. So she came to Jerusalem with a very large retinue. I don't know if your version has the word retinue. It's just basically a bunch of people in her company with camels carrying spices and very much gold and precious stones. When she came to Solomon, she spoke with him about all that was in her heart. I find it kind of fascinating that she brought gifts to this incredibly rich guy. I guess, the universal question, what do you get the man who has everything? Well, you get him more of everything, I guess. And she just brought all kinds of stuff for him. I don't know if she was interested in maybe kind of buying some answers. I don't think that was going on, but she gives him some gifts. And here we find out that she is not just there for trivia. She's not going to ask him, what's the best way to make your gold shine or something like that. Her questions, it says, were in her heart. I think that's enough information to conclude these are some things that have been weighing on her, things that she didn't just make up on the trip. These things had been kind of haunting her heart for a long time. I imagine they were important questions. I think that for two reasons. First, because it describes them as being in her heart, because there's questions that we have, but only a few probably that are in our heart. And the other reason I think they're pretty important is she probably traveled thousands of miles, at least 1,000 miles to get there. This was not just a quick trip around the corner. She had to pack up and travel for a long time at great expense and discomfort. in order to get there. You don't travel with that large of a group just to ask Solomon his favorite color. She's there to get some serious answers. Here's verse 3. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was hidden from the king, which he did not explain to her. That's 100%. She would ask a question, he would have the answer. Ask another question, he had the answer. Just straight down the line, he answered every single question. And it's not about smarts. It's important to make that distinction. I mentioned he was relatively intelligent, but it was about wisdom. But it says nothing was hidden from the king. That seems to imply there's things that are hidden from not kings, at least this king anyway. Things were not hidden from him. This was God-given insight. That's pretty important to remember on things that truly mattered. And this wisdom that she was confronted with kind of stunned her. Notice her reaction as far as her expectations. Here's verse 4. This is 1 Kings 10 and verse 4. When the queen of Sheba perceived all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, she kind of looks around at everything, the food of his table, the seating of his servants, the attendance of his waiters and their attire, his cupbearers, and his stairway by which he went up to the house of the Lord. Notice this, it says, there was no more spirit in her. I think probably a fair, sloppy paraphrase would be she's breathless. And then we find out what her expectations had been before and I imagine during the trip. Here's verse 6. 1 Kings 10, verse 6. Then she said to the king, it was a true report, which I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. Nevertheless, I did not believe the reports until I came and my eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. You exceed in wisdom and prosperity the report which I heard. So not only were her expectations kind of pushed to a high level, and she had high expectations, when she got there, it exceeded her expectations, which is quite impressive thing. She had heard about this wisdom of Solomon, and as far as she was concerned, it was too good to be true. She didn't believe the reports, but people kept saying this guy is just amazing. But it ended up being twice as impressive as she'd been told. Here's verse 32. Actually, we're jumping back. Here's 1 Kings 4:32. This gives us an additional little bit more insight about Solomon's wisdom. 1 Kings 4:32. This might also kind of, I don't know, at least vaguely describe the conversation that they had. Here's between the queen of Sheba and Solomon. 1 Kings 4:32. Here's what he was capable of. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon, even to the hyssop that grows on the wall. He spoke also of animals and birds and creeping things and fish. Men came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. See, she was not the only one that made that trip. She was just the most famous. But he had all kinds of insight on all kinds of topics. And what's interesting is she points out this kind of insight must benefit those around Solomon. Here's back to 1 Kings 10:8. I think this is pretty important to note. When she describes how impressed she is, she says in verse 8, how blessed are your men? How blessed are those, are these your servants who stand before you continually and hear your wisdom? She's saying, this is great. You have so much insight. And the people around you, they certainly have to benefit from that. And then she turns her attention to God in verse 9. Here's 1 Kings 10, verse 9. Blessed be the Lord your God who delighted in you to set you on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever. Therefore he made you king to do justice and righteousness. So notice her process of thinking. She says, this is great what you have. And then she thinks, the people around you must really benefit from that. And it obviously comes from God. Her attention is gradually directed towards God because of what Solomon has. A long time ago, I think it was about 1700s, 1800s, there was a term that kind of surfaced for the guy who knew pretty much everything. Our access to knowledge, as far as worldly knowledge, was limited to a certain extent that you could bump into a guy who pretty much knew a little bit about everything. They called him the Renaissance man. So if a guy was described as a Renaissance man, you could ask him about math or science or biology, and he'd be just able to rattle off stuff. That's kind of impossible now because we've got more information. But he knew lots of stuff in lots of areas. Solomon was more than that. It wasn't just about regurgitating information and passing quizzes. He had insight about life, and his insight was from God. It wasn't just about saying clever things. He had a lot of information, but it was specifically designed for an important purpose, and we find that out in 2 Chronicles 1, verse 10. And I'll just mention this briefly if you want to glance at it, but for the sake of time, I'll give you the gist, because I bet it's familiar to most of you, if not all of you. When Solomon was confronted with the responsibility of ruling as king, he kind of got worried because he realized he was going to be in charge of a lot of people. I bet some of you have jobs where you are over a certain number of people, and there's a certain amount of anxiety that can come with that. He's going to be running a nation, a kingdom. And in 1 King 1:10, he wanted insight to make good choices. He wanted to be able to tell the difference between right and wrong so that he could lead the people better. In a small way, I think I experienced that for the first time when we were at camp. Some of us are involved in Camp Koinonia, and there'd be like 100 or so kids, and we'll go on a hike. And there were some times when I'd lead the hike, and there's a difference between getting lost alone and getting lost with 100 kids following you. The pressure's on to at least pretend like you know where you're going, and so I made it a point to kind of know ahead of time where I was going. It's significant when you know you're being followed. Making the wrong turn alone is a lot different than making a wrong turn with a bunch of people following. You can probably identify when you've had to lead a caravan of cars. You think, oh yeah, I know where that restaurant is, follow me. And then as you're driving, you say, I think, and you realize that maybe your sense of direction wasn't as accurate, and the pressure's on because you know that when you make the wrong turn, they're going to make the wrong turn. And I think that's a little bit of what Solomon felt. He was a leader, but he was like a leader with excellent directions. That's what he was, this wisdom that he had. He knew, even though later, I'm sure some of you are thinking things really went badly for him, his wisdom that was available to him made it very clear where to turn and where not to turn. And that's why the Queen of Sheba was so amazed. Solomon clearly had inside information. And as a person without this insight, the Queen of Sheba was drawn to that, as were many people. During that time, Solomon was number one. He was the best there was. There were no other contenders. 1 Kings 4:31. Notice his ranking here. 1 Kings 4:31. Now God gave Solomon wisdom and very great discernment and breadth of mind like the sand that is on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the sons of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan, the Ezrahite, Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was known in all the surrounding nations. Can you imagine he was even wiser than Ethan and Darda? I don't know who they are either. But they were really, really wise, because if you lived back then, you would have been like, oh, really? Wiser than Ethan? Or I keep wanting to say He-Man, but hopefully that's not how you pronounce it. But Calcol, Darda. If you were in conversation, say you want some advice, go see Calcol. He'll help you out. Or Darda. Those are the guys you want to see. Back then, it was like, no, that's all third-rate stuff. Go see Solomon. He's the one. They must have been pretty wise, these others that were contenders. But back then, you might have known who they were, but compared to Solomon, there was no contest. In fact, if Ethan or Darda happened to be visiting Jerusalem there when Queen of Sheba was there and said something, and then Solomon said the opposite, you'd be wise to go with Solomon's conclusion. He was the standard by which all other wise people were measured. To make this as relevant as possible for us today, we don't have Solomon. He's not here. He's dead. He's done with his life. But we have the Bible. And it's really important to realize that it's not just a good book, it's the standard, and it's better than anything else. Just like with Solomon, there are other contenders who I want to briefly address this morning. There's other sources of insight. And they can be legitimate and helpful and useful, kind of like maybe Ethan was and Darda. Sometimes very helpful, but none of them can do better than the Bible. Just like Solomon was wiser than all those people that were mentioned, the Bible is wiser than everything else that competes to run our lives. And that's really what's going to happen tomorrow is we're going to set out to make decisions, and then the truth will surface. You'll find out who's really running your life. The Bible is wiser than all those things. The one contender is superstitions. I bring that up because I think it's more prevalent than we might realize. The Bible is wiser than our superstitions. It's kind of a weak contender among the ones I'm going to mention. We kind of think of superstition as belonging to primitive cultures and sounds pretty silly, them reading tea leaves and bones and things like that, but it's also very common in sophisticated cultures. We just have sophisticated superstitions, whether it's tarot cards or astrology or even down to saying things, well, don't say things are going well because then that means things will go bad. It's kind of creeps in like that, and we've all probably got a little bit of that. And there's nothing wrong with opening a fortune cookie unless it directs what you do next. I always thought it'd be nice if I got a fortune cookie that says you're going to be rich. I'll just hand that in at the register and say, I'm good for it. There you go. But Bible versus superstition, when it comes to the best inside information, the Bible's better than superstition, obviously. Here's another one. The Bible's wiser than science. Now, I understand there's some conflict here. It's a very impressive contender, and it has provided some nice things. Science is not the enemy. Science has provided transplants and artificial organs and antibiotics. However, in the past, it has not always been right. Came up with things like spontaneous generation and phrenology and other things that people would blush to know were part of responsible science. More times than you might think. And yet sometimes people consider science to have more insight than the Bible, especially with the issue of evolution, and there's opposition there. You can see it when we try to find new angles on the Bible to make it fit current science. It should be the other way around. And the Bible is not a science book, but it's unfortunate that a lot of times we consider the Bible secondary to science. It's kind of like I've shared this before. It's like you're driving and you have two friends in the back seat, and one has always given you good directions, and the other has given you directions that are accurate most of the time. If they conflict, I know who I'm going with. It's just kind of makes sense. So the Bible is better than science in regard as making the directions choices for your soul. Bible's wiser than science, but also education in general. I'm a teacher. I always have to make this disclaimer. I'm not against education. It can be a good thing. It's a lot better than ignorance. I don't necessarily encourage pursuing ignorance or anything, but a lot of times it results in pride. And we have more knowledge than we ever had before, and so we think we're pretty sophisticated. We're more educated, more college degrees, more debt about college degrees than ever before. But often education tries to reshape the Bible. There was a movement, in fact, in the 1800s called New Criticism that tried to approach the Bible with an arrogant intellectualism, and we're still dealing with the damage of that. But the Bible is wiser than human education. One reason is the Bible helps you not be a fool. Now, a fool is not someone who's stupid. A fool is someone who's not wise. Sometimes education produces fools, very well-educated, intellectual, brilliant fools. We can get doctorates in everything now. I remember hearing about a guy who did his doctoral thesis on the origin of the potato, and who knows, it may have been significant, but it can get pretty silly pretty quickly. Genesis 21 was quoted by this guy very briefly. This guy went away to get his education. Just so you know, to be careful, it can end up where you shoot yourself in the foot. And he came back and he was going to deliver a lesson, and he spent about 5-10 minutes about how everybody should be as educated as he was, at least subtly. And he got done with a little prologue about how brilliant he was, and then he opened the Bible and read how Abraham took the iwi to make a sacrifice. Meaning you. And so, as soon as you set yourself up as an intellectual, you're going to do something wrong. That's why I always encourage my students not to become grammar police, because eventually you get pulled over too. It's important to not get arrogant. When the Bible is opposed or warped by highly educated, go with the Bible. Just because you have a degree doesn't mean you're not immune to becoming a fool. Better to be wise and educated, maybe. But that's one contender. I find this is a possibility. The Bible is wiser than statistics. Our culture loves statistics, and they can be helpful as well and bring things into focus for us. Percentages are kind of our way of prophesying, predictions, maybe reveal the mindsets of people, kind of find out the way people are thinking. We say, well, we notice patterns here, and here's statistics. And it kind of gives us peace of mind. We've all done the conversation. Say, it's okay, go ahead and fly. Percentages are you're safer than driving in your car, right? We've always used that statistic to make us feel better about flying. Sometimes statistics can muddy the water. Unfortunately, there's a lot of church growth books that aren't necessarily bad, but they approach the church as if it was a business. And instead of using the Bible as a guide, they crunch numbers and analyze percentages, and it results in a lot of misguided decisions. The Bible often ignores statistics and defies the odds. Ask Abraham and Sarah. The odds of them having a baby were nil. The odds of Gideon winning, 0. So it's important to limit our trust as far as statistics being a contender against the Bible. God has shown us time and time again that if anything, the odds are irrelevant to a certain extent. I understand they're of use in some regard. Doesn't mean you ignore them. You just don't let them call the shots. So when the statistics or odds say one thing and the Bible says another, I'd go with the Bible. The Bible is better than statistics. We laugh at people who have, or at least maybe look down our noses at people who have superstitions, and the Bible condemns this kind of thing. Look at Isaiah 8:19. This is God addressing people who are kind of consulting, I guess, supernatural avenues to get inside information. Isaiah 8, starting at verse 19. When they say to you, consult the mediums and the spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people consult their God? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and to the testimony, if they do not speak according to this word, it is because they have no dawn. In other words, what are you doing? Go to your Bible. I think the same response is appropriate to anyone who lets any of these contenders kind of run the show in lieu of the Bible or to supersede the Bible in matters of the soul. What are you doing? Go to your Bible. It's better than superstition or science or education or statistics. And you know what? Ironically enough, it's even better than Solomon was. He was good. He was really good. But when Jesus was holding the people accountable, this is in Luke 11, he was holding them accountable for not accepting the truth. He mentions the Queen of Sheba. It's in Luke 11:31. The Queen of Sheba, the Queen of the South, which is the same thing, will rise up with the men of this generation at the judgment and condemn them because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And listen to this. And behold, something greater than Solomon is here. See, Jesus came to deliver the truth, and he left the Spirit to make sure the truth was written down. That means we have access to something that's greater than Ethan and Darda, greater than science and statistics, greater than even Solomon. Solomon was the best there was, but the Bible has more insight and wisdom that he did. That's pretty incredible. I mean, something big. Our world kind of plays down the Bible as just kind of a general guideline and a thought for the day kind of thing, kind of an expanded Hallmark card, and it's far more than what people think it is. If you let the word in your heart and mind, that makes you wiser than Solomon. Like Solomon with the Queen of Sheba, people will be drawn to you for answers. They will notice the way it affects the people around you, and they will be led to God, just like the Queen of Sheba was. But it's very important to keep a humble perspective because there is one more contender. There's one more opponent that notoriously tries to oppose the Bible. And this contender is probably the most defiant of them all. And it's the one that we listen to the most instead of the Bible. You. And it's really, really important to know that. I need to remember this. The Bible is wiser even than you. Wiser than your thoughts and feelings, wiser than your experiences, than your whims or your guesses about the nature of your soul. When it comes to handling something as powerful as God's Word, it's important to have great humility and that you approach it with submission. If you submit to the Bible, that's when it will make you wise. 2 Timothy 3:15 tells us that's where wisdom comes from, is the Bible. Now, you can just get earthly wisdom just by living. Don't put forks in outlets and things like that. You can pick that up along the way. But as far as things that matter for your soul, that only comes from the Bible. And that puts you in a very unusual position. You have access to vital inside information, and that makes you very powerful. At the risk of making students arrogant, here's Psalm 119:97. Psalm 119, verse 97. Oh, how I love your law. It is my meditation all the day. Your commandments make me wiser than my enemies, for they are ever mine. I have more insight than all my teachers. I rarely show that to my students, but I have more insight than all my teachers, for your testimonies are my meditation. I understand more than the aged, because I have observed your precepts. You realize what this is saying? All the earth level insight stuff, you can bypass that and be one up on things if you're in your Bible. If you become devoted to the Bible, you're like the eye in the hurricane, where everything else is chaos. You're not perfect, but you're in this place of stability that nobody else has. And no wonder people are drawn to that. Don't underestimate the Bible. The world is very busy trying to get us to do that, to think of it as just a nice book. Don't underestimate what you have. It's the words of the maker of the universe. There is no greater source of wisdom. There never has been, and there never will be anything greater. And that leads to some exciting possibilities. It's exciting because that means my life, your life could be better than what it is right now. I have never met anybody who says, nope, I don't want anything to change. It's perfect the way it is. Things could be better. There's a better version of you that you can find through the insight of the Bible. There's more insight, more stability available to you. If we really believe this, we will find the time to read it every day. We'll make the time. If we truly understood what this book is, we would make it happen. Some of you probably been in a corn maze. I went to one time, some friends and I remember there was at least one platform that you could climb up and kind of look down and see the situation. So much more clear to be able to look at it from this angle and say, okay, there's the exit, and there's my friends. And you could even talk them through it. It was a different angle. It was a better angle. It was clarity. And I think that's kind of a little bit of what the Bible does for us, is you see the way out. And standing on the Bible, you'll see the only way out of here is to be connected with Jesus. Your best source of information, called the Bible, which is several copies of it in this room, very clearly says that the only way to be connected with Jesus is through baptism. It'd be foolish for me to not mention that as much as possible, and for any of us for that to be in our heart. If you understand the significance of this choice, we're singing a song now to encourage each other to make decisions. One of those decisions might be to be baptized so you can be connected with God and find the one and only safe way out of here. If you have questions and concerns and you want to ask for prayers, that can also be asked by coming forward, but it can also just be as you're walking out the door to pull somebody aside. We were just talking a few seconds ago how we need to do more of that and say, I need your prayers in this regard. Whatever your need is at this point, we hope you take advantage of that while we stand together and sing.